Welcome to the 2023 Albany Crossing Walk Recruiters Rally and Award Ceremony. For those of you who don't know me, haven't seen me before, even though I've been up here at this event for probably 20 years, I'm Kit Jackson, the chair of the Planning Committee. I invite you to take a chair. If you need more chairs, they're stacked in the back, or you can perch on a stool over here, whatever. Our Albany Crop Walk has been going for 42 years. This year will be the 43rd annual. And you can see the history of it on the bar graph that's over there against those two orange tables. In 1981, we had our first walk, which had about 300 walkers, and they raised $11,000. Last year, we had about 150 people come here to First Lutheran Church to walk on what we call the main walk. But an equal number of people walked either in their own neighborhoods or with their church group on another day. Some of them were on the rail trail, at the Empire State Plaza, over at the crossings, and wherever, lots of different places. And between them, probably 300 people altogether, they raised $112,592, which was a record for us. And it brought our cumulative amount of money raised over those 42 years to over $2.6 million. The exact figures are written on the bar graph if you want to go and examine it later. And as most of you know, a quarter of the funds raised comes back to our area to assist local food pantries and soup kitchens and a couple of shelters. And as you can see in your program, there are yellow programs on the table. If you didn't get one, grab them, they're in the middle of the table. Last year we distributed over $28,000 to 25 different food pantries and soup kitchens in Albany County, and one renegade one over in the city of Rensselaer, because they're part of the Council of Churches, which is the sponsoring agency for this Albany County Crop Walk. The remaining 75% is used by Church World Service and a number of partner agencies in some 30 different countries around the world for hunger relief, community development, and other programs that empower people to feed themselves better, including improving access to clean water. The funds raised in crop walks like ours are needed more than ever because hunger and food insecurity are on the rise, exacerbated by a number of factors, one of which, of course, was the COVID-19 pandemic. Another, the war in Ukraine. I was pleased to see in the paper today that Russia is still allowing grain shipments to leave Ukraine, though, and be shipped to places around the world that depend on that food. And the third is climate change. Church World Service has been working in various places to assist local farmers, generational farmers, people who have been growing the same things on the same land for generations, to adapt to the changes brought about by climate change. And so this year, we decided that we would have, as part of our rally, a little presentation on climate change from the meteorological standpoint, from a local standpoint, and the global standpoint. And so, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the three people that you're going to hear from. The first one is Jill Swed, whose face you might recognize, morning meteorologist on News 10, Channel 10 ABC. I'll get it right again. Who's also the honorary chairperson of this crop walk, and so you'll see her again on May 7th with her walking shoes on. She's got her boots on today. She must think it's going to snow, I think. And then we'll learn how climate change is affecting local farmers. We have Laura Tenite from Indian Ladder Farms. I bet you all know the cider donuts and picking apples and the Simon the donkey and all the other things that you see out there. I drive by every Sunday on my way to church, so favorite place. Whose family has been on that land since 1910. I think you told me, right? 1916. Generations. Yeah. And then Adam Smedberg, where's Adam? There he is. He's way in the back there. From Church World Service, who will give us the global perspective on what's going on there. So we're going to be filming the panel. And so we'd like you to stay in your seats if you can, and we'll keep the noise in the back. If somebody comes in and just needs their packet, you folks can deal with that back there, but we'll do it quietly. Jean Bianchi, who is our regional PR coordinator for the 8 different Capital Region crop walks, is the one who put this together and designed our shirts, by the way. And she's going to be the moderator, and I'll let for a ticket from here. And Eugene.
Thanks, Kit. So Kit basically said pretty much what I had on here about the speakers and all. Hello, everyone. You all are here and you have been tremendous supporters of Crop Walk. And thank you for doing that. And so a lot of times we want to get an extra reason why we're walking. And we want to blame it on the weather or we want to say it's something, and we need a positive outcome out of this. And Church World Service has positive outcomes. Our local farmers are working hard to change with the times. And Jill, I watch you every morning and think, oh no, spring is coming, and it is. So thank you for being here. We're going to have 3 presentations. Jill's going to go first, then Lori, then Adam, and then when we're done, we'll have some Q&A after that. So Jill, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all as you're kicking off for this year's Crop Hunger Walk. As everyone was saying, I'm Jill Sled, the morning meteorologist at News 10 ABC and Fox 23 here in Albany. And it seems like every day, whenever I'm putting the forecast together, I'm seeing and reminded of climate change, whether it's the cold days or the warm days that come during the summertime, just how ever-changing our climate is, and of course then the impact that that has not only on local growers here, the people that rely on the food that is grown here, but also then all across the globe as well. So I figure we kind of take it back to the very basics and talk about temperatures and where they've been going over the past decades. As with any science, we look at years and years of data. So if you wouldn't mind going to the first slide, please. Thank you, Adam. I know it's kind of teeny tiny, especially as you're looking up on the monitors there. But what you're noticing there is the average surface temperature across the globe dating back to 1880, when we have more reliable temperature data coming in across the globe. The blue lines indicating below normal average global temperatures. The red lines, which you see really taking off, especially into later parts of the 19th and 20th century, is how quickly our temperatures have been rising over the past decades or so. So that data takes us all the way through 2012, and you can see again how quickly and also how rapidly even the departure from normal has been rising, especially if you're working through the 21st century. You can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So to kind of break down that chart in a little bit more detail, Earth's temperature is rising at an average about 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit, which may not seem like a lot, but when you take that cumulatively over a decade, over several decades, you're starting to notice that 1 degree change in temperature can start to come very quickly. And again, that may not also seem like a whole lot, but it does have much bigger global impacts. Again, we're looking at a larger scale. Now that rate of warming has been changing and rising more rapidly, especially since the 1980s. In fact, we're warming at a rate more about twice that amount as well. So in total, dating back to 1880, we've seen a global temperature rise of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, it may seem small, but on a global scale, it is much larger. Back in 2022, so that's last year, it was the 6th warmest year with an average temperature of 57.1 degrees on record. That was based on NOAA's data all across the entire globe, not just here in the US. In Albany, we set a number of record temperatures last year, some warm months as well, so again, a closer knit scale. So again, it's not just here locally, it is on a much larger scale as well. And 10 of the warmest years in historical records have all occurred within the past 12 years or so. So temperatures really are rising, even in the near or recent future as well. Go on to the next one, please. So the next one is you're taking a look at some of the recent temperature trends, and you'll notice that across the globe, temperatures are warming. Probably comes as no surprise with a lot of the news that you hear, the stories that we tell each and every day on News 10. But with the extra heat that is accumulating across the globe, that is driving regional and seasonal temperature extremes. Think about some of the wildfires that were going on in California, but now on the flip side, it's been a very cold, wet winter for them. So it's not just the heat, it's also then what comes on the other side. As the weather looks for balance, it wants to find equilibrium. And so a lot of times you can come off of a very hot summer and have an incredibly cold winter on the backside of that as well. So it's all across the globe, all hemispheres, all parts of the globe. It's also reducing snow cover and sea ice, which of course we've been talking a lot about, especially in the Arctic areas, impacting habitat for many animals as well. It's intensifying heavy rainfall events and changing the habitats, as I mentioned, for plants, animals, expanding some, but shrinking others. So not only are humans trying to adapt to these ever-changing temperatures and weather patterns, it's also those that are in the animal kingdom as well. Go on to the next one, please. Moving past some of the numbers. I'm a numbers person, I don't know how many people are numbers people here, but I'm talking about some of the societal impacts of climate change. According to the WHO, the World Health Organization, they say that climate change is the biggest health threat facing humanity. So think about that. Of course, over the past several years, past 3 years in fact, we've been talking about COVID, but in a larger scale, climate change is one of the bigger drivers in what our life is going to look like now and in the future. So, with climate change, it changes things like clean air, the ability for safe drinking water, sufficient food, and secure shelter. They also estimate, the WHO, that between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 more deaths per year due to malnutrition and disease. And so, of course, with the lack of, or maybe inability to find sufficient food, nutritious food, that could lead to malnutrition, but also disease could be increasing as well. We can move on to the next one, please. I guess the chart doesn't show up, but there was a nice little pie chart there showing you the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions, as of course that is another part of climate change as well. A lot of studies have been done to understand how rising temperatures impact the amount of greenhouse gases that are floating up in the atmosphere that may lead to additional warming. So you'll notice energy maybe comes as no surprise, one of the key contributors there, but also agriculture contributes to about 11% of the greenhouse gases that we put out each and every year. There's going to be one more click on this screen. Thank you. And actually, agriculture is the #1 source of methane and biodiversity loss, which is something that we really need to consider when looking at climate change and also greenhouse emissions. Go on to the next one, please. So, now kind of transitioning on to our next topic that we'll have with our Indian Letter Farm friends, climate change and farming. So rising temperatures and carbon dioxide actually are beneficial for crops. Of course, plants need carbon dioxide to grow, to continue to thrive. That is part of their photosynthesis process. But to an extent, as we look at a certain point, warming temperatures can actually accelerate growth. But of course, in water-constrained areas, think some of the deserts, some of those areas that maybe have a lack or inability to find clean drinking water, can actually have an adverse impact more quickly. So above a 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, it becomes more difficult to adapt practices and crops become more expensive. So we are still in that range where temperatures have not exceeded warming more than 2 degrees Celsius, but if we continue on the trend that we're at, that all could very change quickly. Thank you. So about 80% of the global population most at risk for crop failures and hunger from climate change are low-income countries, and that's according to the World Bank. So here in the US, we are one of the top greenhouse gas emitters across the entire globe. We join a list with China, the EU, India, and Russia, and we're some of the wealthiest countries across the globe. But yet our counterparts, who are more poverty-stricken third world countries, they're not the greenhouse gas emitters, but they could be impacted more greatly by changes in climate change. So what are some things that can be done on a very basic level? Well, we can use water more efficiently and effectively. For some farmers, they may switch from rice over to maize or legumes. They're not as water dependent whenever they're growing those, and they're also very inexpensive. And the World Bank is suggesting that soil health is maybe one of the more important things that farmers can look at to continue to improve and propagate their crops so they can continue to mitigate the impacts of climate change. That's the end of my speech. Thank you all for your time, and I appreciate you all for being here.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be nearly as polished and efficient as that, since my slides don't necessarily totally correlate to my topics. But
I'm from Indian Ladder Farms, which is an apple orchard. I'm the 4th generation on the farm. My son and my nieces are the 5th generation working on the farm. We are primarily an apple orchard. We can go to the next slide. You can see historically here is saying the farm was established by my great-grandfather in 1916. We are named Indian Ladder Farms after a local landmark in Thatcher Park, where there was a Native American trail to get up and down the limestone cliffs of a fallen tree against the cliff that was been traditionally called an Indian ladder. They used to appear also in Niagara Falls and many other types of escarpments through the state. And that's how we got our name. You can see that the ladder was later replaced in the 1800s by a rung ladder. It was sort of more of a little adventure park for people in their Victorian garb than it was, an actual trail. And this is an old picture of the farm where you can see we're laid out right underneath the Helderberg Escarpment. So it's a very scenic location. You can go to the next slide. This is a little bit of the history of the farm. When my great-grandfather started it, it was a dairy farm. In the 40s, our dairy barn burned and the cows were saved, but we decided to plant more orchards and then eventually transitioned to an orchard. We can go to the next slide. Well, I'm just putting this pitch in here. We opened for the season. Those dates, yes, those dates are correct. April 7th, we'll be opening with our spring event, Baby Animal Days. And on Easter weekend, we'll be holding our annual Easter egg hunts. And we always do this activity as a fundraiser. And so this year, the Crop Walk is going to be the nonprofit that we're going to have people donate money to and hopefully sign up some additional people to participate in the program. You can see the throngs gathered to go hunt their Easter eggs there. Okay, the next slide. We also, in addition to our orchard, we grow pumpkins and winter squash, we grow blueberries, we grow raspberries, and we now have a cidery and brewery on the premises where we make hard cider and beer. With the apples we also grow hops, to a certain extent barley, and then the small fruits that we grow also are used in making of a flavored ciders and beers. And then the next slide. This is an experimental planting of hemp for seed and fiber, which is another crop that we've been learning and growing recently. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so our main crop is apples. And in spite of some of the great data that we saw in the last presentation, agriculture does contribute to climate change, but it also, when done correctly, can do a lot towards mitigating climate change. One of the ways that it's good to, a way to mitigate climate change is with the perennial crops and the tree crops and crops where the ground is not turned over every year and replanted and a lot of carbon emitted. So in fact, our orchard actually sequesters a lot of carbon. We are actually under a conservation easement through the State Department of Agriculture Markets to protect the land in perpetuity from development, and keeping the land open space and in agriculture goes a long way towards mitigating climate change, which once we get into development and increased energy use and all that, we start to produce a lot more carbon. And as we know, in terms of global hunger, we need to have a growing population, and in spite of agriculture sometimes being detrimental, we are going to need to continue to produce an increasing amount of food, and much of our farmland is being converted from agricultural to non-agricultural use around the globe at a very steady pace. So farmland conservation is another very important factor here. In terms of apples, I'm 60 years old. Climate change really started kicking in like in the 60s and 70s. So a lot of what I'm going to report to you that we're seeing on the farm are changes that have happened within my lifetime. There's several types of things that are happening with the environment due to climate change that are particularly impactful. And although the slowly rising temperature has a major effect in many ways, The extreme weather events that we've been seeing are one of the primary things that are creating problems for food production, at least in our region. You can go to the next slide. One of the worst things for apple farms is frost in the spring when the trees are in bloom. Generally, the trees in this region bloom around Mother's Day. And with climate change increasingly, we have these spikes in weather, and it hasn't happened the last few years, but prior to that, we had several incidents of the months of March and April being extraordinarily warm, where we had several weeks, stretches of temperatures in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, which forces the trees to bloom. And then when the temperature drops back down to a seasonal norm, say in April, that's in the 20s, then the bloom freezes, and then there is crop loss. So we had 2 years there with 1 year between of complete crop loss due to this freak weather that was been attributed to climate change. So this is a major problem, and there are technologies that we can adapt that are expensive, but if things continue to go this way, we may have to put windmills in the orchards to keep the air moving so that the cold air does not settle on the blossoms. In addition, some of the farms, especially further south in the Hudson Valley, will have helicopters come in and just hover around the farm. One farmer I know who rode his ATV around the farm with a digital thermometer and just kept taking spot temperatures through the orchard and then calling it into the pilot. And as they would dip, they can go to about 28 degrees. So as the temperature would start to dip in any one section of the orchard, he'd come and hover over that section. So, you know, we can go to extremes, but these are some of the challenges that we face. I guess we can go to the next slide. So obviously, honeybees and pollination is a whole separate issue. Honeybees are obviously wild pollinators, are affected by many of the factors due to climate change. One of the problems that we have in terms of extreme weather are these rain deluges. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I certainly don't remember most of my life getting, you know, like 6 inches of rain, you know, in such a short period of time, or having such heavy rain continue for so long. So, of course, obviously rain during pollination is a disaster for the bloom, it's for the pollinators, we don't get good pollination, a lot of factors there, but just in general, heavy rain like that is very bad for crops because it just the continuous wetness of the environment triggers the growth of a lot of disease in the orchard or whichever the crop is. Insect infestations, but primarily molds and funguses. It's very problematical. The flip side of that is obviously the drought, which we did experience last summer. We can just flip to the next slide. So again, all right, so we had the blueberries and the raspberries. Just to go back to the deluge thing, when you're raising, blueberries are a little more resilient than raspberries, but when you have a whole crop of raspberries in the field, and we do primarily pick your own, that's ready to be picked, and you get even a small normal rain shower, you're looking at pretty serious crop loss. If you get those extreme deluges and these prolonged periods of rain that have become more and more familiar, sometimes you feel like you're living in a tropical rainforest and not in, you know, upstate New York, that will completely destroy berry crops. How can we get around that? Well, some farms are growing all berries under cover now, and that is a way to do it. Of course, you know, food prices are pretty much stay where they are, okay? And of course, we do have, you know, blips of inflation and so on. But when the input costs go up so dramatically, where you have to, you know, grow all your berries undercover, stuff like that, that's a big investment. And then, you know, we have hunger. We don't want to charge too much for food, but somehow the numbers have to work out, right? So now drought, most of our orchards, except for the very established old orchards, are under irrigation. Our new orchards are under irrigation. We do not have the capacity to irrigate are field crops like pumpkins and winter squash. So when we had a drought like we did last summer, we lost almost that entire crop. More concerning though is, the inability to replenish the aquifer. We don't farm next to like the Schoharie Creek, where they will pump water out of the creek and irrigate their sweet corn. We have to irrigate from the aquifer. So I've had a reporter, not a meteorologist, at the farm doing a story about the drought, and I was explaining to him about the concept of irrigation, and I was showing him the irrigation system where the water comes up, pumped up from the ground and trickles through the tubes along the base of the trees. And he's like, so you don't need it to rain at all then? And I'm like, well, this water is coming from somewhere, and sooner or later, more water has to go down in there. So, we can't keep irrigating out of groundwater aquifer forever. It has to be replenished. So, did you take 7th grade earth science? It's the one thing I remember, all the arrows. Anyway, I don't want to go on for too long. I will mention a couple other things with the extreme weather, and this is the high winds. The wind, we are in a very windy location anyway, at the base of the escarpment. The west wind just funnels right through our farm, which is great when it comes to the deluges and the dripping wet orchard and the infestations of insects and mold that you have to worry about. But also the wind can be very destructive. And we have a big problem with wind when it comes through when the crop is ready, and it causes windfall. All the apples will fall to the ground. Increasingly, we're planting trellised orchards, which are really more like vineyards, but they're taller. It's like a skinny tree supported by wire, and it goes up, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but it doesn't have a great big trunk, And it hasn't happened on our farms, but other farms, the wind has come through and just laid flat the rows of trellis, just tip them over. And these are some very high winds. So another thing we're seeing increasingly is the very high wind. The frost I talked about, the heat waves are becoming increasingly significant, as we saw last summer. The heat waves, the orchards are, like I said, irrigated. Many of those plants are well established. They are pretty resilient in the heat, but a lot of other crops and plants are not. One of the serious problems we have with the heat, obviously, is for the human workforce that is in the field needing to do work by daylight, and the temperatures and the risk of heat stress and heat stroke are really significantly climbing up now. And there's other parts of the country where heat stroke for farm workers has always been a concern, but upstate New York is not one of them. So that's another issue. I wish I could say that there was a lot of things that we were doing that we were able to easily work around these problems, but they are not. It's just, farming has always been complicated and risky, and it's becoming more complicated and risky and expensive. But we do try to do our best to keep producing food for people, to keep the land in agriculture, to keep, we have significant forests and wetlands on our farms, and we try to farm sustainably around them, preserve our land so that it will continue to be able to produce food and not turn into a giant abandoned shopping mall. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
No.
I did take 7th grade earth science, so. I do want to actually just address one thing that you mentioned there with that. How many of you have been involved with Crop Walk for, say, 10 years? 15 years? 20 years? All right. Well, I still saw a good number of hands over the last 15 or so years. You may have heard of our program we did do in Africa, our Water for Life program in Africa. We're familiar with that, where we were building wells and water pumps in Africa. One of the main things I would like to just address with that is, wherever we built those, we always made sure that it did not take water from another community. We were always making sure that the water we tapped into, the groundwater, wherever we were pulling that from, that water never affected another village or another community. So, but I do want to get into our topic here of what we're doing to address climate change. And I want to do this by sharing some stories with you. And we'll start with our first one. Bees. So the first picture you see there at the top, that is Jamel. And he is a farmer from Georgia, not where the Braves play, the country out in Europe. Jamel is part of a small town known as Gorjormi, which is dependent on agriculture for hundreds of years. Unfortunately, due to the rapid changing environment and harmful activities like deforestation, continuing his way of life has become more and more difficult. Because of this, many of Jamel's neighbors have chosen to migrate to different cities to find employment. Like his neighbors, Jamel was worried about the longer winters, the drier summers, and what this would mean to him and his family. Thankfully, when he was connected to CWS through our local partner, RCDA, Jamel received hives full of buzzing new friends that became his solution. Now, Jamel's past experience in beekeeping and the additional training he received through the program has made him an excellent and passionate beekeeper. Beekeeping is an ideal practice for someone like Jamel because it's much cheaper than caring for livestock, and it can resist the effects of climate change. By selling the honey from his hives, Jamel has been able to bridge the financial gap in his agricultural-based income. He explained, we just need a very small amount to help us to be able to stay here and not have to leave to find work elsewhere. While Jamel was talking about his bees, he glowed with excitement. He told us that he loves to observe the behaviors of the hives and finds it interesting that they have their own laws and regulations. He added, it's difficult to explain, but these are our natural creatures. They give us both spiritual and economic support. Now, during our conversation, Mini Jamel, his son, remained glued at his dad's side. Jamel told us that they have a good friendship and that he hopes to pass on the practice of beekeeping to his son one day. He shared, one who knows how to look after bees will never quit. It is a lifelong devotion. And thanks to this lifelong support, Jamal and his family can look to the future with peace, knowing that his family can stay in a beloved home for as long as they'd like. Now, if you look at the picture next to it, those are hives that are high up in the trees in Kenya. Now, they're up there like that for two reasons. One, it gives the bees a very straight line approach to the trees in their area. But two, Kenya is an area that is, gets hit with flooding on a regular basis. So by hanging them in the tree, in the air like that, the hives won't get knocked over or damaged during any flooding that happens. So these are programs that we started probably in the last 5 to 6 years in both of these areas. And we have seen strong support from both these areas of the world to continue to grow this program. So we'll go on to the next slide. We're going to talk about our work in Europe, specifically in Moldova. Now, this is a program that we started a few years ago, but we have adapted it since to support Ukrainian refugees there. And I'll explain that in just a second. Basically, what we have been working on is solar paneling on schools. In Moldova, energy is very expensive. The nation doesn't have fossil fuels of its own, so fuels through coal and natural gas are imported. And this means that many things that we take for granted, like electricity and hot water, are extremely expensive for families in rural Moldova. We're helping to change this equation through our Renewable Energy Technologies program. We support the work of local organizations like Ormax, which is working to make solar power technology, among others, more widely available as an alternative to these expensive conventional energy sources. In particular, we found that installing solar-powered hot water systems at preschools, we've helped 10 schools add hot water systems. Some of the schools didn't have any water heaters installed. Others had very old systems that were in need of repair, but the local authorities couldn't afford the needed renovations. Thanks to this program, this year alone, over 420 students now have hot water in their schools, their bathrooms to wash their hands, as well as their school kitchens to wash their dishes, and have hot water for cooking and drinking as well. Think about it, if your kids didn't have access to hot water in their schools, for their kitchens, their cafeterias, for them to wash their hands, how likely were you to send your kids to school? So this is a huge improvement here. It's a renewable technology. It is also a technology we have brought to several different refugee centers who have taken in Ukrainian refugees there. Moldova, just to put some background, because you may be like me and didn't even know where Moldova was on the map prior to last year's invasion. Moldova is a country of 2.5 million people, probably about the same size as Connecticut. They've taken in over 800,000 Ukrainian refugees. Now, of that, about 90,000 have remained, but many have gone on to other countries or have tried to move back home. Those who have stayed are children who were left by parents as they went to try and find other places to live and then call their children to come to them, and others. So what we've done is we've installed these types of solar panels on the refugee centers so that the centers have the renewable energy and are relying on having to import fuel or natural gas, coal to power them. So things like these technologies can help us to help so many people who've been displaced and have been going through so much over the last year or so. Next, we're going to take a trip to Indonesia. I'm going to tell you a little story about some Indonesian farmers. Climate change is real, and helping Indonesian farmers understand and adapt to climate change. One farmer, the weather is unpredictable now, he says. He's a farmer in his 50s in the Bau village in South Sulawesi, Indonesia. This leaves us feeling confused. Some of us continue planting our seeds, knowing we're risking crop failure from weather change and pestilence. Now let me just stop there. Unlike Indian orchards, you guys have one growing season or two, depending on what you can do, right? Down here in Indonesia, they grow 4 times a year. And they're typically done on 12-week rotations, 12 to 13-week rotations. So keep that in mind as we're going through our story here. He notes, he's the chair of the Harapan Lembag Bau Farmers Group in his community. What we need is information about the changing weather patterns and modern weather forecasts to guide our decisions on whether to plant or not. We never had such information until we joined this new program. They didn't have a Jill down there to help them out with the weather situation. He says the right to highlight unpredictable weather changes in Indonesia. In fact, erratic weather has put farmers nationwide in a difficult position. Our team keeps hearing from farmers that they are no longer able to understand and predict weather patterns using local wisdom. That led CWS and a local partner, and a dream team of sorts to launch an initiative to help farmers access information and technology to help them understand the effects of climate change and changing weather patterns. Importantly, they're helping them to adapt and explaining on how the project working for him and his group. The farmer says, I joined the land conservation training workshop where we learned how to observe weather patterns properly, how to use information from agricultural extension workers effectively, and how to use modern gauges to measure rainfall. All this information can help us plan for the next planting season, including what crops to grow. We also learned how to make use of organic fertilizer and an organic pest control mix to help maximize crop quality and replace chemical pesticides he adds. As the chairman of the group, he is responsible for 24 members. As such, he says he's grateful to join Dream Education and training activities, adding, even though I'm already 54 years old, I'm not too old to learn new things and help improve my own and my group members' lives. We hope we can improve our living standards with our knowledge, that we can become part of a community that maintains and preserves our land and water, and that we can raise awareness in our own community about the benefits of organic fertilizers and pesticides. So we're going to take one final stop on our little journey here around the world. We're going to go to Haiti. Now, the story I'm going to share is regarding the school in Haiti. But you can see this picture and another one. These are homes that we have rebuilt after Hurricanes Matthew, Harvey, and Irma all made landfall in 2016 and 2017. We started doing our home rebuilding programs after the earthquake in 2010 hit. Now, these homes that we've rebuilt in schools, despite these hardships and situations, none of them have suffered any structural damage. This includes the most recent earthquake in 2021 that registered 7.8 on the Richter scale. In 2016, Hurricane Matthew devastated the Grand Anise department of Haiti. Its powerful winds destroyed homes and buildings and wiped out crops and livelihoods. As families lost both their source of income and assets in the hurricane, they had limited means to recover from the devastation. The damage was done in a matter of hours, and recovery would take years. After Hurricane Matthew, we helped families rebuild their homes. We repaired or rebuilt schools, distributed livestock to families to raise, and put seeds in the hands of hundreds of capable farmers. One of the schools our team focused on is the public school in Casavan. It was badly damaged in the storm, so badly in fact that students learned under tarps instead of in classrooms. The community of Casavan came together for their school. Countless neighbors pitched in to help our team get supplies to the school site, which is not accessible by car, and build a new, safer school. The school reopened in September 2019. In early 2020, well before the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Haiti, the moment of celebration came. The official inauguration of the new public school happened on January 30th. Students raised the Haitian flag in the courtyard. State of Vegas staff, government officials, and community leaders mingled with the families of the community. The bright blue paint gleamed from the new classroom buildings, bathrooms, and the school office. Maureen Simon, who served as a school committee of parents, said, "I am proud of this school. Hats off to the population of Casavan, because wherever I announced there was work to do, people came. When we live together in the community, it's important to join hands and to produce something good." The construction workers didn't come here to take it easy. Either they came here to work hard. Thank you, construction workers. Thank you, engineers. During the inauguration of the new school, teacher Ernso Luis Charles reflected on the long road to this happy day. The school building we had before was not constructed well, he recalls. During Hurricane Matthew, we thought it could serve as a shelter, but unfortunately it was among the first of the buildings that were affected. When the school was destroyed, we had no hope for reconstruction. We used tarps, but whenever it rained, the children got wet. When it rained for weeks, the school had to close. Later, we built a shelter. Skip past one sentence. We built a shelter on the site where the school was constructed. We cut tree branches to build the shelter, and each community member contributed with what they could. The new construction is a pride for me and a pride for the children because we were in such bad shape. Some parents chose to take their children out of school because the bad situation was in. I did not feel good sending my children to school under those conditions because there was a lot of rocks and dust, but they had to go there because there was nowhere else to go. A mother of 2 students recalls, "When I learned the new school was going to be built, I felt really happy. I helped carry water and sand. When we saw how the foundation and the trenches were being dug, how the work was being done, we were happy because it was different from how we had seen the construction being done before. Now, the new school has been completed, and we feel proud. Wherever we go, we are proud and happy with the way we hear people talk about school, how beautiful it is, and how good quality construction." So these are just a few of the programs that we are doing to adapt to communities that are at high risk for climate change. And I'm sure Jill can tell you that the extreme weather we're going to see over these next few years is not going to stop anytime soon. And we can't do anything to help with the earthquakes, but when it comes to hurricanes and some of the other storms that come, we can make sure that communities like these in Haiti are resilient and are able to stand up to these ill effects. So, and we do that thanks to your support. So thank you all so much for all the support you've given us here with the Crop Hunger Walk here in Albany, and we look forward to seeing you all here again in May with your teams. Who's up next?
Thank you, Evan. Jill and Laura. Questions? Does anyone have any questions for our panel? This is your great opportunity. You want me to ask you a question? Okay, I've got a question, Laura. One of your coworkers mentioned, and I was amazed about this, that you've worked with a cooperative extension to change the type of apple trees you have? Is that the ones you said that had a different tree trunk or something else? Putting you on the spot, sorry.
Yeah, well, it is true that one of the slight benefits of it getting somewhat warmer overall, that as everyone has noticed, I think some plants and animals from the south have been creeping northward because they can survive in our climate better with the increased temperature overall. And I'm sure everyone who gardens knows about, the frost-free dates and the planting zones and what kind of plants can survive in which zone. So there are varieties of apple trees that have traditionally been more associated with maybe the mid-Atlantic or the, West Virginia, that in some cases we can now grow further north. And I think that's probably what the reference is.
Thank you. Another question? Anyone want to ask Jill about what happened the last 3 weeks with our weather system? Sorry, enough when you're on here. You were not responsible.
Yes and no.
Jill,
Yes.
hello there.
Hi.
I know you're very busy as a meteorologist with Channel 10 and come here every year, but would you also be available to come to local churches to bring your message about the correlation between climate change and world hunger? The reason I raise the question is I'm sensing a decrease in the amount of enthusiasm, at least among my local people, and I'd like to reignite that enthusiasm. If people heard from experts such as you what the connection really is between having 3 feet of snow in March and not having any food on the table, or having eggs cost $9 a dozen, it might make more of an impact. So my question is, are you available to speak to local congregations? And if so, how would that be arranged?
So the presentation that we just did is being recorded, and that's going to be sent out to all your churches. But absolutely, if that's something that your congregation is interested in, I think having panels similar to what we did today would be really beneficial. So yeah, I'm happy to do that, and yeah, try and coordinate that. Obviously we talk a lot about the rising food prices now due to inflation and some of the disruptions in this supply chain because of COVID. But we also can't overlook the climate impact as well. And I think that's always something that is always going to be in the back of our mind. And as you mentioned, maybe it is something now that's on the back burner. It's not maybe the factor at the forefront. But we're all living it, and it's affecting every part of our lives. And that's what makes my job so interesting each and every single day, because the weather does impact everyone. Climate is going to impact us and our future generations. And so what can we do for our children, our grandchildren, generations beyond that, to ensure that they're not going to be dealing with the same stripes that we are right now?
That's why it's a real concern to me, because like many other people here, I have grown grandchildren. And what happens as they grow up to become the ages of my daughters, and what happens after that?
And I think, with climate change, it's obviously a very hot political topic. It's become highly politicized on both sides of the aisle. And so finding that middle ground, that we are still a humankind. We are all in this together. And how can we do this safely, effectively, for the next generation? I think sometimes we just get caught up in the now and then.
You hit a very important point when you said it's a political issue. I would like to see it become a bipartisan,
Yes.
or better yet, nonpartisan humanitarian issue.
Because it is. It is at its very core. And there's no reason for this to become a politicized event. I don't know when that happened, but it should have never happened, in my opinion. So yes, absolutely. To answer your question simply.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that leads into the PR
Yes.
When you go back to your congregations, we're gonna be making a video from this. You can go and have a second hour, coffee hour time and show the video of what's happened today and have discussions with everyone and tell them what the difference is and that your crop walk money does make a difference in the lives of not just the food pantries locally, but globally. Like Adam talks about this, that there's a seed that you're changing so that it works in all different types of weather. Do you want to explain that one? Because it's beyond 7th grade math and science.
So what we're doing, when we talk about with like the farmers in Indonesia, is looking at the seeds that they're using now and the growing patterns that they've been doing. So when I said before that they grow every 12 weeks. So looking at what they would plant, let's say on April 1st, and if it didn't work last year on April 1st because there was rain that came through and flooded out the seeds, then we need to look at a different seedling to plant that in that area because good chances it's going to get flooded out again. So what's a hardier vegetable that they can plant that will be able to take on the extra rain and be able to, so that's what we're doing, is we're looking into those growing patterns and to those weather patterns and making sure that, you know, that they have access to seeds that will be able to grow and not be washed out. So.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Okay.
As Adam was saying, I'm one of those people who has been doing this for quite a while. And I remember back in 2020 when I was trying to get information about how it was going to work and nobody was really sure how it was going to work. And I remember I ended up getting a phone number for somebody in Syracuse who spoke very nicely about it. And she said, did you ever, and I said, I've been doing this for a while. And I remember how the walk started out. I mean, when I started anyway, it was 10 miles and then it was 10K. And it's been going down steadily every year. And I just asked her, I said, is that because people are getting older and fatter and they don't want to walk? And she said, no, you really want to know why? I said, yes, I would love to. And she said, that's because when we first started, it was so difficult to get water. We were trying to get the water to the women so they'd only have to walk 10 miles to get water back to where they were. And now because of crop walks, we've been able to get it so now we have to go about 3 miles. And I don't know if this question is for Adam or Jill, but with the way the climate change is right now, is it likely that's going to get better or worse in the near future?
I would say that with drought,
Wait for the mic, please, so that this can get recorded.
Yeah.
thanks. Sorry, I'm just used to talking, because the microphone's always on me, I apologize. I would say with drought and the increase in droughts, then yes, finding sufficient, safe, clean water is going to become more difficult again. But again, with the funds that we're raising through this Crop Hunger Walk, through other initiatives, maybe we can find ways to eliminate that and continue to keep it at the same distance. Good for that.
What I'll just add to that is, what we'll take that next step though is that you're seeing extreme weather. You're seeing the extreme drought, you're also seeing the extreme heavy rain, heavy flooding. So it's making that number, it's not shrinking that number because whatever is getting dumped, it's causing too much damage. And it's, destroying the crops, it's destroying the trees. You saw the picture before of the beehives up in the trees in Kenya because they can't put them on the ground, otherwise they're going to get wiped out. Kenya has been going through, I think it's almost every 2 years, it's either drought or it's flood for the last 4 to 6 years. It's been consistent. And so, unfortunately, until things kind of get calmer, and unfortunately, I don't think they're going to it's going to get worse before it gets better. Unfortunately, I think it's the way it's going to be. I mean, Jill, you probably, how many class 4 hurricanes have we had in the last 5 years?
The major hurricane number is exponentially growing.
Yes. So we're seeing extreme temperatures. We're not seeing a evening off point. I guess would be the right way to say it. Said it's one way or it's the other way. Kind of like politics, but yeah, I'd say that would be the way it's going.
Thank you, and now?
Okay, so now we get to the parts of the rally that you're used to, but I want to say one more time, thank you to Joe, to Lori, to Adam, for giving us this perspective, because it's more important to hear it and to see it than to read it in your packet. And we're glad that all of you came and sharing their knowledge with us. So usually we talk a little bit about the packets. Many of you here are congregational recruiters.
So this will be my first year participating in the crop walk. So in terms of the challenge of the crop walk itself, I can't speak to that. But I studied cultural anthropology at Union, and the value that kind of instilled in me is always seeing people. So just very simply remember that there's people at the end of everything that's being done. I had the privilege when during my time at Union to be at the Resource Center of Refugees in Utica. And the cultural mix of everyone from across the world was absolutely amazing. And that's really what helps me. It's the experience that I got that helps ground me in being a global community and how important the work that we do is for impacting the world. And it's amazing that this event exists to remind us of hunger not only here, but also around the world. So that being said, what I will read to you, I have adapted from both the Interfaith Power and Light and the Church World Service. We hold brothers and sisters who suffer from storms and droughts, intensified by climate change. We hold all species that suffer. We hold world leaders delegated to make decisions for life. We pray that the web of life may be mended through courageous actions. We pray for right actions, for adaptation and mitigation to help our already suffering earth and community. We pray that love and wisdom might inspire our actions as communities, so that we may, with integrity, look into the eyes of brothers and sisters and all beings and truthfully say, we are doing our part to care for them and the future of the children. May love transform us and our world with new steps towards life. We thank you, Almighty Creator, for the bountiful harvest you have generously given us on this earth. Your harvest of food, clothes, clean water, and a decent place to call home is meant to bless all the children in all the nations on earth. We are your vessels, your hands and your feet on this earth, and we stand against the injustice of hunger and poverty. We offer ourselves to be used as your instruments to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and house the unhoused, as commanded in your word. May the work that is before us through the Crop Hunger Walk restore healing and hope to your children and inspire others to join us so that together we can transform lives and communities, and so that we can all enjoy your harvest here on earth. Amen. And thank you all.